God says, hey, you're going to be the one that delivers Israel. And he's like, yeah, no. And we're here. Welcome back to Church's
520 weekly recap.
Yep, that one of them. Weekend recap. Oh my goodness. Speaking is good for me. It's a good thing that I am the one that, talks in front of people.
Yeah.
Anyway, this week we talked about essentially how throughout history and how today we are to follow Christ.
Right.
Now, we're using following Christ as like the overarching term because, well, it was more God the Father in the Old Testament.
Right.
But for us, it's definitely for following Christ. And we looked at some different times in the Bible on where people did or did not follow.
Correct.
Right. And the first one we looked at was in the Garden of Eden. And what it actually meant for them to follow God. And they literally just had to tend the garden and not eat of a certain tree. That's
true.
it. That's all they had to do.
Yeah.
Did they follow?
They did not.
Yeah. They couldn't even handle not even just eating that fig or that olive or whatever it was that was that fruit. And they ate it anyway. And
Wait, I don't think it can be a fig.
Why?
Because for a fig, a bee has to go inside with the pollen. That was the cat, sorry. The bee has to go in with the pollen and maybe a wasp. It's a certain kind of wasp. It goes up inside because it's like little tons of little like fingery things, and it goes up in there, and that's what like pollinates the fruit.
Okay.
And then it dies, nurturing the fruit. So every time you're eating a fig, you're eating death, and there was no death in the Garden of Eden yet.
Yes, you're talking about post-fallen state. It could have been different pre-fallen.
Oh, that they just figged by themselves.
I don't know.
Do you think pollination, the concept of pollination, was something that came after the fall?
Potentially. Or the mode of pollination could have changed.
Okay.
Could have. Maybe it didn't. And maybe that was all part of like the fall, is that it then required death. Or death happens because
Wouldn't that be crazy though if it was the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and then therefore
you're eating
that
death.
fruit was also cursed? Like the tree was cursed, the fruit of that tree was cursed. Like the fruit of the women, like all the stuff. And every time, and it requires death now to make this thing for people to enjoy.
Well, and you're eating death. Yeah. But, I mean, that's from the book of Second Speculations.
Yeah, Second Speculations 19.
Right. So, I mean, that's all just random thoughts.
Anywho, that was a random thought. Thank you for joining my rabbit trail. That is not at all what we talked about. Continue. So they did not follow God and what he said to do.
Right. So, for them, it looked like just not eating that fruit and just tending the garden.
Right.
They didn't do that, so they did have a consequence. Right. And they
were removed.
Yes, that one.
They were removed, and then they were to have a much harder life than not hard at all.
Right. So, yeah, we saw that. Then we looked at,
and also that their that their instructions are not our instructions.
Right.
Again, just reiterating.
Yes.
Even just in that section that their instructions are not our instructions. We are not supposed to not eat from a tree, and we are not to.
We should tend a garden.
Yeah. Well,
but it's not specifically instructed to us
the Garden of Eden.
to
Right.
tend the Garden of Eden.
You couldn't get there if you tried.
Right.
Flaming swords and such.
And such.
So, and continue. Next one.
Then we talked about Gideon and his little run-in with the Midianites and the
They
Amalekites.
say he's running with the Lord. I'm like, yeah.
That too.
Midianites.
And the fact that he was kind of chilling out doing his thing, and God came to him and said, "Hey, you're a mighty man of valor,
And he said,
and this is what you're going to do." And he kind of was very hesitant and asked for. Everybody talks about the fleece and the wet and dry, but he actually asked for a sign before that when he offers flatbread and a burnt offering, and that happens. And then Gideon actually follows after that sign and cuts down a wooden idol and cooks barbecue on top of it.
That's true.
And yeah, basically shows that Baal is not the god that everybody thinks it is. And anyway, everybody gets all up in arms. The Midianites and the Amalekites come and basically say, "Hey, we're here." They pull a Russia and come across the river.
It said, surprise.
Surprise, we're here.
Not a party you wanted.
Right. And then God says, "Hey, you're going to be the one that delivers Israel." And he's like, "Yeah, no." And then the whole fleece thing, wet and dry. And he's like, "Okay." And then he gathers a bunch of people. And God says, "That's too many people."
That's too many. And he's like, no, it's enough.
Yeah, too many, bro. And then God says, tell him if you're scared, just pound sand and go home.
Yeah.
Right?
He's like, you don't have to be here if you don't want to. And
Right.
some people were like, thank you, I'm going.
Right, because there was like thousands of people
Yeah.
at this point, and they said, "I bid you adieu."
Yeah, he said, no, thank you.
They went home and took their dollies to go play, and then God's like, "Yeah, you know what?
Still too many."
too many."
That's a
And-
big number.
Yeah,
Gideon's like, that's less than it was, actually.
and he's like, "Okay, take these yahoos down to the river. They're thirsty."
Watch them drink.
Yeah, and if
Of
they
all commands, watch them drink. I'd be like, that's an ick for me. I don't enjoy watching people drink.
yeah, you wouldn't be saying
Throats
that to
go
God.
like, blah, blah, blah. No, I know, but
Anyway, so.
watch them drink.
Anyway, he take them down to. I didn't even say watch them drink. It just those that drink in this certain way. You're going to keep those guys and go into war with them.
Yeah, like,
So not kneel down and bring the water to your face, but actually get down up in it and lap it up like a dog. You're going to take those yahoos and those savages. And
I have so many thoughts about
it,
that.
it went down from a fair amount of people to 300.
Very little.
The original
Comparatively.
300. Sparta had nothing on these guys. So he takes his 300 and does the thing and kicks some tail and
Wins.
delivers Israel. And it was such a long fight, to so much that he was actually chasing the Midianites and the Amalekites around and came to a couple towns and was like, "Hey, can you give us some food? Because we're tired." And they're like, "Who are you that we should give you food? These other guys are the ones that are in charge."
Right.
And he's like,
scared.
"Okay, well, then we'll come back after we're done dealing with those guys and we'll whoop you around too." What?
Those poor people. They're like, help. And they're like, nah. And they're like, okay.
So they went and captured the kings of the Amalekites and the Midianites and brought them back and kicked the other guys' tails too, and essentially delivered Israel from being oppressed to the point of anytime they had food, the Midianites would come in and steal everything. They wouldn't leave anything for the Israelites to eat. Like that's why earlier Gideon was actually in a wine press in a hole on a hill threshing wheat just so he could hide the fact that he might have some wheat to actually eat.
Yeah.
So it was pretty bad existence. And
He did good though.
he did good. He followed exactly what God told him to
Took
do.
him a second to get there, but he did it.
He followed. I mean, he needed some reassurance.
Yeah,
like we all
as
do.
we do, as
lot.
one would.
Right? Especially being in such an oppressed time and saying, "Oh yeah, by the way, you're gonna go overthrow these people."
Yeah, but just like
Right.
Moses needed stuff too, and they were
Yep.
oppressed at the time too. They showed up something you could.
Well, not only were they oppressed, he
Like,
also
think-
ran away.
Well, there's that.
But that's another
Other thing for another time.
topic for another day.
Yeah. So who's
But-
next?
Well, let's
Oh, sorry. I thought we.
let's
Pardon?
finish.
no.
So he did his thing. He did exactly what he was supposed to. He followed God. He did exactly what God commanded him to. Now, is that for us today? Are we supposed to follow as Gideon followed? And I would say no. And big reasons being is he asked for signs. And we are not to ask for signs. We are to live by faith. Right. The other thing is God is not calling us to go fight the Midianites.
Correct.
That's not for us.
Wouldn't
so-
even know where to look.
Right. And it was a specific task for him to do, to follow God at a specific time. So yeah, not really for us today. So he did what he was supposed to do.
Yeah.
And then we looked at the apostles, the original 12, right? And what did they have to do to follow Christ? Because Christ is actually there. So they're actually following Christ.
Like
It's not just,
physically. Not,
physically.
Not futurally.
So what did they have to do? Well, they had to give up their jobs and take off, right? Fisherman, tax guy, physician, all these different things that they had to drop and take off, whether they had family or not.
Right.
They were to follow Christ. They were also to cast out demons and heal the sick, because they were getting the Israelites ready to be the kingdom of priests that they were going to be called to be.
Right.
So they had some things that they were to do. And then one of the biggest things is they were also commanded to baptize.
Yeah.
And
The end of Matthew.
at the end of Matthew. Now, it does say go into all nations, but we have to remember that would be after Jerusalem, after the chief priests, after the head honchos were to have flipped and actually followed Christ. Because they never flipped, because they actually never acknowledged Christ as being the Messiah, and then doing their law failure confession and being baptized,
Right.
that program got put on hold.
Right.
Right? So then the question stands is how the apostles were to do and to follow all that Christ commanded. Is that for us today?
No. What they were told to do was to take their gospel, which is Jesus is the Messiah, the kingdom is at hand, we're
Right.
coming soon, baptizing them into that. And that is not for us.
Right.
That is not our direction. That is not our directive.
Right.
We have a different gospel
Right.
where Jesus is, yes, the Messiah, but Jesus is our freedom, our Savior,
Right.
death, burial, and resurrection. And so, and then when you believe in that, you are then baptized into Christ.
Right. So you are jumping right into our next person, and that was Paul.
Hey, Paul.
And what did Paul have to do in order to follow Christ, right?
He had to be an ambassador.
He had to be an ambassador. He was to take this mystery message and take it to the world.
Yeah.
It also talks about how he was sent not to baptize, but to preach the gospel, which is completely contradictory if you don't realize it's to two different people at two different times doing two different things.
Right.
Because that's something that the original 12, but then 11 would have never have said, because they were very specifically told to do that.
Right.
Right. And come on, Choo Choo, where'd you go? Anyway, so he was to do these things, and
I think maybe you were translating their purpose for baptism is completely different than our baptism into Christ.
right. So yes, our baptism into Christ is spiritual, and their baptism is very much physical, because they physically failed the law.
Right. Well, and they were physically supposed to be priests.
Yes.
They were supposed to be the kingdom of priests, and you had to be washed. You had to be cleansed before you could go in and do your duties. They were supposed to be that, and they
Right.
so they were healing, because you couldn't have any spot, like you couldn't be imperfect.
Yeah, you couldn't have illness, you couldn't have maladies,
As
you
a
couldn't
priest.
have demons. Like all of those things that you needed to be essentially perfected to
Earthly perfect.
do the ministry, they couldn't have. Right. And that's what
They
they
were
were
being
sent.
healed. They were being washed. They were, so anytime you are baptized is means into the identity of.
Right.
And so they were being baptized into the identity of the kingdom of priests, whereas we are baptized into the identity of Christ.
Right. And being a part of his body.
Right.
So, in that, are we supposed to follow Paul, or follow the
Directive of Paul.
directive, or imitate Paul?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
He is the one that we do imitate as he imitates Christ.
Right. I mean, that's very much what Scripture says. So, we follow him very closely, and that we also make sure to live our life for Christ, because we are thankful for what he's done.
Yeah.
Not because we have to, not because we're guilted to.
Right.
It is simply out of gratitude that he would do something so gracious and so loving to us. And, in going through our marriage class, and how, like, the pink and blue megaphone and how people talk, well, there's a lot of pink talk, like, in church, where it's like, God loves, God this, God that. If you also think about it, God respected humanity so much that he also sent his son. Right? Because it's also on, like, the blue megaphone side with the blue hearing aids. It's God respected humanity so much that he didn't want them to be alone. So therefore he came to do the thing so that they didn't have to be alone.
Yeah. Well, one of the things they said in our class was, it's kind of hard for people to explain what respect looks like in a marriage. And sometimes women say, well, he hasn't done anything for me to respect. And that one of the things was, respect is seeing my potential. What is it? Essentially seeing my potential. I need you to be quiet, ma'am. Respecting his spirit.
Not necessarily the
Even
actions.
while his earthly actions may not be lined up. So you are essentially yeah, you're respecting his spirit, the soul of who he is, the knowledge of who he could be, and then, not who he is physically. And so, God
Right.
was respecting the potential.
Right. Well, and it's kind of like the unconditional respect, just like men are called to unconditionally love their wives. Right. And it's not because of what you've done that I love you. It's because you are who you are that I love you.
Right. It's because you are.
Right.
Yeah. I think it was a nice way to like explain respect.
Right.
Just because it is hard sometimes, like even when you think of like why would God do stuff? Well, because he loved, right? But like why?
Well,
But like why did he love us?
well, and it's not just that, but it's also the fact that like it's great that he loves, but that's not how I receive that stuff. So yeah, the God-shaped hole in the heart and all of the stuff throughout the 90s
Yeah.
that's so pink
Yeah.
and
Very
so
feelings
fluffy.
based.
I'm just like, yeah, that's great. Like I see my need, but
Yeah.
if you explain it how I would actually get it, it's a respect thing. Because guys, when they feel respected, love, right? But also it's like a guy to guy. We're not going to be necessarily overly emotive and show it in a love thing. It's a respect thing
Right.
that we're relating to one another.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. It was just it's a nice way to look at, and we respected our potential. He loved us like that. And it's like, oh, that's cool. Thanks. Thanks, God.
so that was what we covered.
Yeah.
And some bonus material free of charge
I know.
for our marriage class. And then we had some good old food.
Yeah, we had some white chicken chili.
Yeah.
And
Thank you to Brigade Cafe for having some stuff to send our way.
yep. And then we had salad. And we had Sundays on Sunday.
Sunday on Sundays.
Yeah.
It
It was delish.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a fun time. We got to have lots of fun, hang out, play some games, have some laughs. So if you would like to join us, go ahead and comment below, and we can get you the deets for you to show up, so that we can meet and have fun and laugh together. And if nothing else, you can catch us here next week, getting the recap. And I don't know. I was trying to think of like a great way to end this thing, and it just went.
Well, good night then.
All right, bye.
Bye.